And we're live. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another high vibe conversation. I'm your host, Shel Shapiro. With me today are Linda Vetrus Nichols, Jenny Langren, and Stina Marie. And today we will be talking all about red and green flags. But before we get started, I just want to do a little housekeeping, as you know I like to do. So I want to remind everyone that this is a safe space. We invite you to share with us as we talk through our life lessons and hold space for you to work through yours. What that means is basically if at any time, whether you're watching live or on the replay, if you feel compelled to share something, tell us more about your story, add to the conversation, please feel free to drop that into the chat or reach out to us privately to continue that conversation. We'd love to have that with you. If you are new here, we'd love for you to catch up on some of the previous conversations. So that means please subscribe to the channel. YouTube.com at Shel Shapiro is where you can find all the replays if you want to catch up. And if you'd like to join us individually for a high vibe conversation of your own, here's where you can schedule with one of us individually and have a one-to-one discussion. So if you'd like to have this high vibe conversation of your own and take that to the next level, talk about what's coming up for you, here's where you can do that. Of course, I will share all this information again towards the end of the live so that you have access to it no matter when you're coming in from. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Red and green flags. Ooh, we so often talk about red flags in relationships, right? But we don't often talk about the green flags and the good things that are coming in and prompting us to keep going forward with. So, Linda, I'm coming to you first today. What's coming up for you when we talk about red and green flags?
What comes up for me is the kind of concept of what is it that you want. And so a green flag is what you've already predetermined what you want. Or if you haven't, you're just noticing another person's behavior. Um, that's kind of gets wrapped into almost decision making for me. So, um, like, how do you want to be treated? Like, say you're single and if you did get into a relationship, then what would that relationship look like? Would what would that person be doing and saying? And um, what would be a green flag for you that this is going to be a safe relationship, that this is going to be um, uh, a person that you can even maybe get along with energetically. And one of the things would be like, if you like your independence and you like doing things on your own, maybe you like to, like me, go camping on your own, or traveling on your own. So what happens when you do something on your own? What is the response of that person? And does that person have, his or her own world that's perfectly fine? So that's kind of what came up for me. You can even just list it out ahead of time. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. Thank you. One of the
Mhm.
things, as you were talking about, like if you've predetermined or like have an idea of what you do and don't want in a relationship. Um, what I'm thinking about is boundaries. And like sometimes you haven't clearly communicated or articulated that something is what you want more of or less of. And so if your prompt is whether you've communicated it, recognized that it's a red flag or a green flag for you, maybe you're seeing it for the first time. For me, it's very clearly like a boundary thing of does that person know that I even want that? And if they do, then like I can reinforce that and like, you know, maybe it's an unsaid thing that they just do it unconsciously and they're not even aware. But if I point it out, like, okay, like I'm giving them affirmation that like, yes, it's something I like. I would love for you to keep doing this, or I like when we do this together. But the same holds true for a red flag. If somebody is doing something that you don't like, whether you've said something or not, recognized it before, you're seeing it for the first time, have you told them that this is not something that sits well with you, and ask them to maybe keep it keep it on their side of the fence so that it doesn't spill over.
Right.
And
And the red flag
something,
and green
yeah,
flag is their response. Yeah. It's beautiful.
yeah.
Right.
What's coming up for me too is some of what I know we've talked about with Stina before, with like giving the other person the permission to, once we've communicated that boundary, like we're not asking them to change. It's their choice whether they accept that, or whether they barrel through it and continue to do the thing that we've communicated we either like or don't like. But
Right.
giving them that choice and freedom, not necessarily like the ultimatum of like I need you to change, and here's why, because that boundary has to
Right.
be clearly communicated before we can even put that on them. So that's what
Right.
was
And
coming
there's
up for
also
me.
like deal breakers. There's
Yeah.
also like deal breakers. So what is it that you feel that you don't need to communicate to the other person, that they just automatically, would respond in a certain way? There's, what are your deal breakers where you shouldn't even have to tell somebody? And I totally honor what you just said, Shell, because it is really important to communicate and let other people know how it is that you feel as well. There's other things, but we do have our deal breakers. Like somebody does whatever, that's a complete deal breaker. We shouldn't have to tell them that. We shouldn't have to babysit them, train them, be their mother or whatever. That's a huge red flag. So that's what came up for me as well.
Yeah. Speaking of deal breakers, I was having an interesting conversation with somebody the other day, and the conversation was going really well. The energy was good. We were connecting on all sorts of levels. And then we were talking about how we could keep the conversation lines open and what that would look like to support each other, as often comes up in a lot of my conversations. And all of a sudden there was like a shift in energy, and I like had that red flag moment. And I just jotted it down so that I was aware of it. That didn't negate the entire conversation because the vibes were good up until then, but something that they had said stuck out to me when they were talking about having a scarcity mindset. They were talking about creating scarcity and like wanting something to be available for a limited time, that like if you don't buy in now, you're not going to be able to get it. And I have the opposite view of like there's it's very abundant, of like there's enough of all of us to go around, and the information is not limited, and I don't need to have my doors open for a limited time in order to get the response that I want. So I just took note of it. I'm not expecting that other person to change, but I'm noticing that maybe it's not as good of a fit as I had previously thought it would. And so we could still support each other, but now I am very clearly like, this is how I can stay on my side of the fence. So it's really good, and I'm bringing it up because I wouldn't have always been mindful enough to stay on my side of the fence. I would have barreled right through. I would have taken notice of that red flag and still barreled through it and still gone on because, hey, the rest of the conversation was great. Let's still just do this. But no, I drew a line in the sand and I said, well, here's how I can continue to support you. And it may not look exactly like X, Y, and Z, but here's what it can look like. And then at least we're still feeling really good about it. So honoring that boundary for me, once I noticed it, was a really powerful thing. So I just wanted to share that because that's progress for me. That's different than the old Shell would have been. Uh, Stina, I'm coming over to you. What's coming up for you as we talk about red and green flags?
Thanks, Shell. I just wrote down the term sober minded, that when I think there's a healthy awareness of both red and green flags that comes from being sober minded, or, grounded, centered, secure in yourself, like having the ability to see the red flags, to notice when something's coming up, but also to give as much or maybe even a little more attention to looking for the green flags, because something that we've chatted about before is that we're naturally predisposed to look at things that are a threat or that trigger us or that we don't like. And it's really easy for our whole focus to go there. And it takes a lot of green flags to balance that back out, to restore connection, right? Like, even if you have a conflict or confrontation or disagreement with someone, it can take time to reestablish a rhythm with that person and connection with them. And it's kind of similar with like a red flag, green flag, where a red flag might come up and you need to acknowledge it, you need to deal with the situation. But if you don't refocus on finding those green flags, then it's not a sustainable connection. Um, if there aren't any green flags, then that's a whole other problem. Um, but I think that when I think about red flags coming up, it's like you said, Shell, you wrote it down, you noticed it. And for me, like in business, I will take that information and say, okay, if I continue to work with this person, I do it with the expectation that this is their behavior or this is a possible pattern for them. And I just don't expect them to behave differently. Like I can't see someone do something or say something and then later be surprised that that's who they still are or how they're still acting. And that goes back to that sober mindedness for me to say, okay, I understand what I'm agreeing to. And so a red flag doesn't have to be a deal breaker. It doesn't have to be something that ends or severs a connection, but just like, oh, noticed that. And do I want to continue on in this direction? And if I do, how am I going to handle that? And for me, there's so many boundaries to set in that situation that are only for you. Like most of your boundaries don't need to be communicated. They need to be acted upon because your boundaries are to control your behavior, not to control other people's behavior. So if I have a boundary that I don't explain myself when I cancel plans, then I just don't explain myself when I cancel plans, right? And if someone asks, then I get to decide if it's relevant to offer that information. And if not, I just say, I'm not comfortable offering that, and I don't even need to have a whole conversation with them about it's my boundary that I don't, share that information or, I don't like, please don't ask me about that. Like, it's not their responsibility to behave differently for me to maintain my boundaries. And the more that we have that self-respect and self-trust in our boundaries, the less other people's red flags like matter in a way or like have influence or pull because you come back to yourself and you're in your like centeredness. It's not like, oh no, there's a red flag, what's that going to do to me, how's that going to affect me? There's not that kind of anxiety about it. It's just that noticing and then making your own decision to adjust something, return to your boundaries, like change your behavior in response to that. And I just find that that's for me the most powerful way to do it. When there's a lot of red flags with someone and you are continuing to agree to engage with them, that's a situation where you notice like your negativity about it. You notice how you're starting to like collect all of the red flags. You notice how emotionally reactive you are. And you get to decide like and assess what's really going on then. If you're in a situation where there are a lot of red flags, what's missing? What's missing? Is it actually that the green flags are missing, or is it that you're violating your own boundaries? You're acting out of integrity with yourself. You're continuing to choose to engage when you don't really want to. So those are like, that's kind of how I think about the dynamics involved in red flags and boundaries.
Wow. I wish I would have had some of that insight 10, 15, 20 years ago when I was in some really not great relationships, because it would have propelled me to get out of those relationships for me sooner than later, as opposed to trying to get them to change. Um, so yeah, I message to my younger self and all of our younger selves, or anyone that needs to hear it, because that's something that, like, it took a long time for me to learn. Even when other people kept pointing it out, I didn't absorb it. So, and it's so powerful. It's so important to come back to you and, like, what you can do for yourself. Um, which brings me over to Jenny, because if you're gonna start with yourself, I think of starting with the breath, which is why I'm coming to you, Jenny. I'm making that connection here. So, what's coming up for you when we talk about red and green flags?
Mm, I'd love to share about the breath. I would love to. What's coming in for me is I also love when Linda says we get to stay on our side of the fence. And today specifically has been a day of several triggers for me that has triggered my PTSD, like my reactions to things. And what Stina is sharing about how boundaries truly is about what I choose to allow in my life. It's so spiritual. It's so connected. Everything, every time we have a conversation, it's so connected with what I'm going through that day and the process and the self-care and the inner work that I'm doing for me. And oh my goodness, I don't know where to go from that. Yes, what's coming in, Shell, is that I came from a place of feeling like everything was green. I came from a place of feeling like everyone will do what they say. It was a very naive, there's trust in life and there's a naive trust in life. And the process for me to recognize green flags has been firstly to recognize that everything I thought was green was not, and to reconnect with my own worth so that I would truly see the red flags when they showed up. That's just that want to protect yourself, that want to recognize when something is off, is so connected to respecting yourself first and valuing yourself first. And from there, to recognize and also enjoy what is truly a green flag, which is for me, the respect and the fact that other people also recognize where their fence is and they are respecting me to stay on their side, and we can have that mature relationship when we look at things from both sides. And I don't know where else to go, but that's what's coming in for me. I'd love to share about the breath. Another conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's all connected. You're so right. And I'm glad that this was a powerful conversation that you could, um, the word that's coming in for me is steep in, so that you could, like, sit in it and, like, absorb all the juiciness and take away from it what you needed to. And as you were sharing about all the green flags that you kind of had to, like, see with new eyes, as if they weren't all green to begin with, or if there were other things that were green and those were actually a different color. Um, it's it's being able to see more of what we want to see in the world. And I think it was Stina was sharing before about how, like, it's really easy for us to notice the red things, the red flags, the things that we don't like about a situation. And it's often harder for us to notice what we do like. And when I work with people, when I talk to people and have just normal everyday conversations, if somebody doesn't know how to respond to a question I've asked, I said, well, start with what you don't like about it. If you don't know what the answer is that you want to keep doing, what don't you want to do? Because it's really easy for us to like notice the bad things first. But once you get all that clutter out of the way of like knowing and having clarity around what you don't want, being able to notice all the things that you do want is so much more prevalent. Like that's when we start to be able to notice the green flags more and more, I think.
Green flags are
And
so connected with our vision, right? To
yeah,
see further than what is existing. And for me, when I recognize green flags, it's what makes me feel alive. And we need people that makes us feel alive.
yeah. And that exactly relates to where I was going with of like the grass is greener where you water it, right? And in order to stay alive, we need to water the things that we want in our lives. So so I yes, thank you for talking about like that vision and being able to see beyond. Um, which brings us right back around to the beginning of this conversation, the beginning of the end of the beginning. I'm not sure. But either way, um, this has been a wonderful high vibe conversation. Linda, I see you've taken yourself off mute. What do you got?
Yeah, well, your comment about like not noticing, well, not receiving the message from others about noticing the red flags, like they were telling you they were there. That was so connected to you not loving yourself. And that's that whole empath narcissist thing. Like you do your best to change the other person because of your lack of love and needing to be loved. And it's that whole game, whole vicious cycle. And the more you go after a narcissist and loving them, the more they are so like, like they're running the other way. And it's like, I love how Bindu talks about like, you run out and jump on the hood of their car because they're going to take off and then they swerve and you go flying off the car and then talk about it later. And it's like, well, I wouldn't have had to have swerved to get you off my car if you hadn't jumped on my car. It's just like, this whole spinny cycle. And that's why I love your book so much. Loving yourself isn't selfish because you did, get to that place and then like you're not about to draw a narcissist in your life, man. You got it, and you got your red and green flags all situated now. So very, very cool. So that's all I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah, thank you. It is pretty interesting because I know and feel that I am in a better place, but what's been great about it, especially recently, is that other people are noticing that I'm in a better place. And um, I've even had like several people this week on calls being like, "You're really great at upholding your boundaries. Like you're the boundary queen." And I never would have called myself that. Like I still think I suck at my boundaries sometimes, but like just the fact that other people are noticing the work that I've put in, it it doesn't make it less important the work that I've done, but it feels really good and validating that other people see it and like see the transformation and how I'm coming out on the other side. And that's a powerful reminder for me that like yes, I am on the right track, not for anybody else, but for myself. So it's really cool when other people share what they've noticed about me, and then if I mention that to somebody else, and they're like, "Yeah, you really have been really good at that lately," or like, "I've been noticing that you do like, you stick to your limitations more, you separate yourself, you go take you time," um, and it's really cool to then see how that can be its own little conversation, and like hopefully perpetuate somebody else's conversation for change if they want that in their lives, if they're needing that. But it's a really good icebreaker and conversation, and either way you slice it. So I'm loving having those conversations. I'm loving having our high vibe conversations as well. So I'm gonna just remind everybody that we love having you here. If you want to have more high vibe conversations with us, you can share with us in this safe space at any time. Again, drop your comments into the chat, whether you're live or on the replays. And if you want to have a high vibe conversation of your own, please feel free to book in with us using this link. You can choose from there who you'd like to have the high vibe conversation with, and we'd love to have that with you. Again, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Shel Shapiro, to catch up on previous conversations and to make sure that you don't miss any of the upcoming ones, because we want to be having these high vibe conversations, not just with you, but for you. So with that being said, we look forward to seeing you on another high vibe conversation. Until next time, we'll say bye for now.